Hi, everybody, and welcome to our TCOYD Live. I am Jeremy Pettus, and this is
Steve Edelman.
Okay, good. So we're going to get into our topic in a second, which I think is a really unique one, on basically why or why not, but really kind of what clinical trials are, how you could get involved, what the pluses and minuses are. And we threw in there this title of, like, should you be a guinea pig? And we're talking about that because a lot of people feel that way, like, well, I don't want to be a guinea pig, I don't want to be poked and prodded with some new medication. And maybe you don't want to do clinical trials, and that's totally fine, but we're here to dispel some of the myths, tell you kind of what it is to walk through these trials.
Yeah, it's important because, being a research subject really helps advance the field of diabetes, but there's a whole list of benefits that could help you. And, thinking altruistically, you're helping future generations of people with diabetes. You'll also learn that to do clinical research, it's a very formal process. There's a lot of oversight on all the research centers and making sure that people get treated fairly and they're educated correctly. So it's an important topic, and I would say I've never heard this topic anyplace else.
We're very unique.
Yeah.
So, and why are Steve and I qualified to talk about this? Well, Steve and I do clinical research. So, we both obviously work at TCOYD. Steve founded this organization, but we also both work at the University of California, San Diego, UCSD, where the vast majority of my job right now is actually doing clinical trials, clinical research. So a big part of my day-to-day is exactly this. Finding patients, educating them on what the trial might be, taking them through the study, publishing the results. All of that is very much kind of in my world. And Steve, what's your kind of
Well, basically, when I was Jeremy's age, I was heavily involved in clinical research. And I would say this, Jeremy, I was thinking about it, mostly research in type 2 diabetes. One of the biggest studies I was involved with was a government-funded study called the Diabetes Prevention Program, which studied people with pre-diabetes and prevented them, or tried to prevent them from progressing to full-blown. But there was very few going on in type 1 diabetes. So I have a lot of experience in doing clinical trials, helping design the study protocol, which was my favorite part.
Yeah.
Recruitment and retention. I spent a lot of time talking to people interested in the studies, giving them their informed consent, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So yeah, it's an important area, and you would not see the advances that you see at the pharmacy, GLP-1s, SGLT2s, CGM, without studies looking at devices and medication.
Absolutely. So before we dive in a little bit more in depth, I wanted to make kind of two quick announcements about things that are coming up here at TCOYD. We have a ton of stuff always going on, but some particular kind of key events. So first, on May the 4th, and you Star Wars fans out there know that, May the 4th is kind of like a Star Wars day because May the Force, you get it. So we're having a virtual conference. So it's a Saturday, it's in the morning, it's completely free, but if you can't make it that day, do sign up because you can come back and kind of watch the talks at your leisure. We're in the process of making actually 3 little Star Wars related, videos that are diabetes. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So please register, talking about all types of things, type 1 and type 2, latest and greatest topics. Anything else about that conference you want to say?
No, I'd say we try to pick the latest stuff going on and some new information. We purposely made it shorter, so it's like it's around 4 hours long. And I'd say bring your loved ones that don't know SHIT about diabetes and let them learn a little bit too. that always helps.
And the second announcement is we're having our One conference, which is our in-person event right here in San Diego. People keep asking me, are we doing it? Absolutely. It's honestly probably my favorite weekend of the year. I'm not even lying. It's August 16th to the 18th, and you can go online and register now. It's really intended for people with type 1 diabetes and their family. We have 600 to 800 people there with type 1 at this resort in San Diego. Talks during the day, fun stuff at night. Eric's band's gonna be playing.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Well, put it this way: if you've been there, we're preaching to the choir. If you haven't been there, it's a life-changing experience. Jeremy and I give lectures our whole career, and we're blown away. And most of the speakers, over 90% of the endocrinologists, nurse practitioners, dietitians, have type 1 diabetes themselves.
Yeah, and the ones that don't, we try to give it to them.
We give them big hugs. We tell them we hope it's contagious.
All right, so back into research. So we talked about how important it is for advancements. So now let's talk about for you, listening, what are some practical benefits? If you talk to somebody and they say, what might I get out of a study? What do you tell them?
Well, there's a short list, but it's an important list. First of all, you have access to diabetes specialists. People don't realize this, but the people in Jeremy's lab and in my prior research lab, we're all endocrinologists. We see patients other parts of the day. The nurses know a lot about diabetes. And a lot of these studies want you to test your blood sugar, and they want you to, have all the management tools to keep the other parts of treating your diabetes equal. And then they're studying some type of drug.
Yeah.
So
that's important about being, and yes, that they're diabetes experts, but even if they weren't, you're just generally seen much more frequently. So you might go see your endocrinologist every 6 months, 3 months if you're lucky, but usually it's kind of 6 months. In clinical trials, it's not uncommon to come in every week or every other week. And just being around kind of in that environment, learning tips and tricks. When patients come in for our clinical trials, it's not uncommon that they're there for a procedure for 3 or 4 hours. So you have time to chat with the nurses, the educators, everybody, and people really just learn a lot regardless of the study, what the drug is or the device is.
The other thing is, usually studies want to make sure that you're relatively healthy, depending on the study, if you don't have severe liver or kidney disease, or even looking for signs of cancer. So you get a pretty executive workup with your laboratory data. That's completely free. And also, besides meeting other investigators and research nurses and other staff, depending on the study, you see other participants.
Yeah.
And they sort of bond, And I just say this too. We'll talk about even if you get the placebo, if it's a drug study, most studies have to have a comparator that when you look at the results, the people on the placebo get better. We always call that the placebo effect because you're getting more attention, you're getting education, you're a little more cognizant of your diabetes. And so we always look at the study results, the difference between placebo, the effect of placebo, and the actual drug.
Right.
So you will get better, most likely.
And some people say too, gosh, I really want to kind of tighten up my control or whatever, because I feel like people are watching me in a positive way.
Yeah.
So anyways, this next one kind of goes both ways. So let me explain what I mean. So you have the opportunity to get a new medication or device, maybe one that's not approved yet. So to some people that can be very exciting. This is something I'm really interested in. It hasn't hit the shelves yet. I want to be first in line to do that. Some people that makes them nervous. I want to wait until this has been approved or studied more before I kind of jump in. So it's important to know though that not all clinical research is in new things. We do a lot of studies in drugs that have already been approved to see if they work in other kind of areas.
Yep.
Or maybe we're studying the long-term effects of a medication that's already been approved. So just because you're in a clinical research study doesn't mean you are a guinea pig where you're the first to kind of test these medications.
Yeah, and I'll give you an example. We studied the islet. Jeremy was in charge. That's the hybrid closed loop system that recently came out, and people that were randomized to it or got put in the study, they loved it. But then when the study was over, because it wasn't approved, they had to go back to their old method. Many people were upset, including, I'm thinking of a patient of mine right now that I need to call him that it's approved. And you have to understand that what Jeremy just said, that we don't want to get too detailed, but there's different phases studies. Phase 3 is the studies you typically do when you present that data to the FDA for their stamp of approval. And then Jeremy mentioned phase 4 studies after the drug or device is approved to find other uses. And those are really good studies because you're not really a guinea pig in a way.
Those can almost be like a diabetes program where a lot of the time, like I said, it's let's test the long-term effects of this medication. You're getting that medicine for free. It's almost like you're in a diabetes clinic rather than a study. But
tell the group how randomization works at these studies.
Let's keep going through some of the benefits. I think there's a few more important ones.
Okay.
So you have here personal interest in science, but also I think, what really goes with that is just an altruistic giving back. You're interested in helping people with diabetes or others living with your condition. So that obviously can be a big part of it. And then yes, compensation. And that is always or very often part of a clinical trial. And we do our best to compensate people for their time, as well as, whatever kind of procedure they're going through.
Yep.
So usually when you sign up for a clinical trial, you have your informed consent document. We'll talk about that. And it should list every visit. Visit 1, you just come in for blood work maybe, so that's like you get $50. But visit 2, maybe you're there overnight. That might be $500 or $1,000 or something. And each visit has its different compensation ascribed to it depending on what you are doing.
I'll just say, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
For inpatient studies, depending on where you're going around the country, you can get paid thousands of dollars, and that's appropriate. We usually at least give you money for gas. $50 for a visit. If you have a Tesla, you get 20.
But there are rules around this. So when these studies are reviewed, you have to be really careful that this isn't viewed as coercion. We're just going to pay people to come in and do a study, and that way they forget about the risks of it and just sign up. We're very careful about that. That's why I said compensate them kind of appropriately for their time, what they're doing, et cetera. This is all kind of reviewed very closely. But you shouldn't be sheepish about it. You are giving up your time and other things, and you should be compensated. But just in that process, you can see how things change a bit. When you come in to see your doctor, you're being billed for that. And hopefully your insurance covers it, obviously. But in clinical research, you're being paid. So it's just like, I feel like that helps just make it more enjoyable, even if it's not a big dollar amount.
Yeah.
But I'm being compensated for this, I'm getting some other benefits out of it. And it becomes a really good way to kind of interact with patients. I honestly think that clinical research is the ideal way to practice medicine because you have time, people are compensated, everything goes generally really well.
Yeah, wouldn't you say that, Jeremy, you have a nice database now of people that have been involved in studies at your research site, and a lot of them are always calling and emailing, hey, when's the next study?
Yeah.
Because they enjoyed it, and they have to fit what we call the inclusion criteria, and every study is different.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really getting over that hump of like, should I do a trial or not? And once they do, and they kind of, again, it's demystified, they know where to go, what the process is like, then people they generally come back, they're interested in it. We should mention some of the, potential downsides. That yes, if you are studying a new drug, there's a potential of some new side effect that we didn't know about. You do need to kind of be aware of that. There's always risks of whatever the procedures they might be doing in the study, if they're drawing blood or admitting you to the hospital or whatever it might be. So it's really study specific, but you have to weigh the pros with the cons.
Yeah, the information you get from a research site has everything listed, pretty detailed. And that's why it's important for you not to just whip through it like a lot of contracts we get. It's not really a contract, but we want you to understand the pros and the cons, because in clinical research, you as the research participant can leave the study at any time. And that's one of the things we don't like, because we want someone in for the whole time period. So the more you understand what you're getting into, the more likely you're going to stick with it and not have a surprise.
Right. So we want people to stay in the study, but we're not angry if they leave the study.
Hey,
We just want everyone.
speak for yourself.
All right. So I kind of typed out these things of what getting involved in a study might be from start to finish.
Yeah.
So you're listening to this, you're thinking, okay, no one's ever mentioned clinical trials to me. I have no idea where to find out information. How do I do this? So how do you hear about a study? There's lots of ways. So one way is simply talking to your provider, and that's probably a good place to start. But the more specific you can be about your interests, the better. If you say, hey, I just want to do clinical research, that's a little vague. It's helpful if you say, hey, what I'm interested in is I have type 2 diabetes and I want to do a weight loss study, or I want to see the effects on my bones, or whatever it might be. Or I'm type 1 and I'm really interested in technology studies, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And that can help them kind of say, oh, there's actually this investigator here that has these clinical trials. Or they might know like an associated university. So people that don't work for UCSD will often refer patients to me if they're not personally doing research, because I'm kind of like the type 1 guy in town. And so those connections can be made that way.
Yeah.
So that's one way.
Well, let me just say real quickly, Jeremy, I'm just thinking of most primary care doctors probably have no frickin' clue.
Well, ideally your diabetes provider, your endocrinologist.
And even some of those may not, but
Right.
you're going through all the options
Yes,
here.
these are options. And if they might say, no one's ever asked me that. I have no idea.
Yeah, and then you're going to talk about other
Right.
ways to look up.
So then there is this thing called clinicaltrials.gov. And every clinical trial that's being done in the country has to register their trial on this website. So you can go there and you can search, whatever, again, something specific, type 1 diabetes. You can put in kind of your area, so it brings up trials, and you can click on studies that sound interesting to you, and it gives a brief description of it. And then there's usually contacts at the bottom of, somebody to email at, your local area to reach out to about the study. And on the research side, we love when that happens.
Yeah.
When people are proactive and they're reaching out, hey, I read about this study, I want to be involved. How do I do that? That's fantastic. So that's another way.
Yeah, and one of the biggest hassles us researchers have is recruitment. And if you don't fill up your study like you're supposed to get 20 patients or 30, you go through a lot of work just to get the study set up. And if you don't have enough patients, sometimes you're cut out.
Yeah.
Or it's just kind of embarrassing. But also, the realistic is we set up for a study. We want to fill it up to the people that we're set up to study. So,
and we are kind of limited with how we reach out to people. Everything has to be reviewed with the language that it's not like we can just blast a commercial or something like that. It has to be approved. It can be hard to find people. That's why you being proactive on your side can be really, really helpful. Some other specific things for type 1 studies, JDRF, Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, JDRF, has a clinical trial finder. So if you just Google JDRF clinical trials, they have a web page where you can click, and it says actually like find a clinical trial in 60 seconds. And you enter, some basic information, how far you're willing to travel, how long you've had type 1, what your A1C is, those kinds of things. And it can kind of create this list of studies that might be close to you.
do you know of anyone for type 2?
I don't know if something like that for type 2. I don't know if the ADA has a
Yeah.
registry or something like that.
But I think your suggestion was really good. Find the closest university,
Yeah.
and they will have lots of stuff on their website
Yeah.
about being a research volunteer.
Yeah. Okay, so then what's next? Let's say you do reach out to one of these studies by some mechanism, and they say, yep, we have a study that you might participate for. What would happen next? So typically what happens, that first visit is actually really important, and that's what we call the screening visit, where you come in, you meet the research staff. And by the way, these studies typically happen in a place where might not be like a typical clinic. Like we have a whole separate research building where it looks like a clinic, but it's just for research. So you go there, but it would be familiar to you. There's nurses, there's exam rooms that look like your doctor's office. It's not going to be like some foreign thing. But at that visit, a couple things happen. They go through what we call the informed consent document.
Important.
Which is very, very important, because this is a document that has been reviewed and scrutinized with the job of telling you every single thing you need to know about this study, all the potential benefits, all the potential risks, your time commitment, what the drug is, why the study is being done, what some potential adverse effects are, all those things. So when we interact with a potential patient, we usually email this to them prior for you to look at. And this might be overwhelming for sure, so it's not like you need to know it all. That's not the idea. But just so you have glanced at it, and then when you come in, the person should actually read it over with you, kind of line by line, to make sure that you understand it. And at the end, you sign it. But again, you're not locked in. It just
Right.
means that you understand what the study is and that you're willing to participate.
Yeah, there's a thing called the IRB, Institutional Review Board. So we have one at UCSD. We make the informed consent up, they review it, goes back and forth, and it's very, very strict to make sure you as the participant know what you're getting into.
Yeah.
It's a good process, and no one complains about it at all. We want people to know exactly what they're getting involved with. Now, this whole discussion sounds like it's getting heavy duty. It's not usually that heavy duty. You as an interested volunteer will learn about the study, ask the appropriate questions, but once again, I hardly ever read documents people give to me. But this is something that you would go through and mark it up and then bring it in, and the staff will answer questions. And I should say that the IRB has a individual that's not involved in the studies, doesn't work in our labs, and is always free to answer questions. So you don't feel like you get someone who's totally neutral,
Yeah.
not someone that's invested in the study.
And these documents, by the way, are written at kind of a lay level. So, and that's important. It's not supposed to be over your head. It's supposed to be very clear what's going on.
Yep.
And the other thing important that happens at that first visit is that every study will have like what we call an inclusion and an exclusion criteria. You have to meet certain criteria to be in the study, and you can't have certain things to be in the study. So for example, it might be you have to be between 18 and 70 years old. You have to have type 1 diabetes. Your A1C has to be between 7 and 10. And at that first visit, they'll probably draw some labs and make sure that you meet all those qualifications. And then if you do, then you can be kind of officially enrolled in the study.
Yeah, I did get a couple emails and texts from some TCOYD folks that are in their 70s, and they say, gosh, we can't get in any of the studies because we're always over the upper age, and that's just the nature of the beast.
And we are making efforts. The NIH is actually asking studies to expand their age range, because it always used to be just like 18 to 60 or 65 for no real good reason.
Yeah.
So now you really have to have a reason why not to include an older patient, because they should absolutely be studied.
And you'd be shocked how healthy and long-living type 1s are getting.
Yeah.
At our one conference, I thought I was at a senior citizen center. I mean, there were a lot of healthy older folks that live with type 1 a long time. So us type 1s are living longer, so that's a good point.
Yeah. And type 2s, of course.
Yeah, but at the one conference.
Yeah.
Well, the type 2s try to sneak in.
So anyways, we don't have to go through the nitty-gritty of that, but that first visit is important.
Yep.
And if you're in the study, then it depends on how long the study is, if you get drugs or not. But you'll go through kind of the protocol. And at the end, you can get results of your own data for sure. And then usually it takes a while for the results to kind of be published. It can be easily a year. But you can be provided with that, so you can kind of see what the fruits of your labor were, and then staying in touch with that group if you want to do other studies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we put together a short list of questions that Eric's going to throw up there as just something to think about. First of all, what is being studied? What drug? All the details around that. And then it's important to ask what % of the participants are going to be randomized to the placebo group, the fake pill, or the fake injectable, and the real. And sometimes it's 50-50. Sometimes it's 2/3 of the folks get the drug and 1/3 don't. So that's important questions. How long is the study? And does it require an inpatient stay? Because you don't want to be involved in the study if you're moving out of the country in 4 months when it's a year study. And obviously the potential side effects of any drug or device. And one thing the Institutional Review Board requests us as researchers to say alternative therapies if you do not get involved in the study. So the randomization, it's a pretty complex way of doing it, but it's all computerized, correct?
Yeah. Oh, the randomization, it depends on the study, but yes, usually it is random, that like somebody comes in and we don't know as the investigator if the person's getting the drug or not. That's what we call a double-blind study, where let's say Steve's in the study, he doesn't know what he's getting, I'm the investigator, I don't know what he's getting, to keep it as fair as possible. So I don't influence the results by saying like, hey, he got the real stuff, let me help him out a little bit more, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
We don't know.
They try to take all the bias out.
And the pharmacy is the only person that generally knows. They're the ones that are actually doing the randomization. They sign codes to it that we don't know. And it's only after the study is completely done that we do what we call unblinding the study, and then we can say, this person got the drug, this person didn't, et cetera. It's fun to guess while people are going through the study, what do you think? What's going on? Like, you think your blood sugars are better? Are you losing weight? Or whatever it might be. But it does keep you really objective.
One thing that we do that's a little bit unique and always have to remind ourselves that when the results are completed and the studies are written up and published in a medical journal, we try to send that to the participants so they can see what they were involved with.
Yeah. So I really love doing clinical research. It's a fun part of my job. I love interacting with the patients. I love thinking about the science or whatever of how can we best study this drug or this device to show that it's working or not. So much goes into it. And it's important to know too, by the time this falls on your doorstep, this protocol, this study's probably been in the works for at least 2 years. Of designing it, of getting the approvals, things like that. So there's a lot of thought and work that goes into it before you hear about it.
Well, this diabetes prevention program that I was involved with years ago, that took 2 years of planning, meeting every month. And you're involved.
Yeah.
Tell them about the study that Jeremy's on the call every Wednesday from 11 to 12:30 Pacific Standard Time.
Yeah.
Your research group, which is an international group.
Right.
And what are they studying, just as an
So
example?
it's just trying to figure out ways to restore hypoglycemia awareness in people with type 1 diabetes. And it hasn't started yet, but it's 10 universities around the world, actually, mostly in the US, but a couple in the UK and a couple in Australia. So just finding a Zoom time for those time zones has been, difficult. And the first year and a half now has been designing the protocol, which devices should we use, which education, all these kinds of things to get the study going. So that's maybe a little bit more of an extreme example, but a lot of thought goes into these things.
Yeah, if you don't design a study correctly, the results don't mean as much as they should.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say before we get to questions? So by the way, whatever streaming platform you're watching this on, you can type your questions directly into that. If it's Facebook, Instagram, whatever it is, and they will, we can screen them out and, look at questions here and try to answer them. So number one, who can I contact about getting involved in a clinical trial? Well, hopefully we went over this to your satisfaction, but I do think starting with your provider, and then if your provider doesn't know, literally cold calling the endocrinology department at the university that's closest to you, people will take those calls and give you information of how to get involved.
Yeah, and let me say that there are several privately owned research units. So a good friend of ours, Dr. Frias, had a research site in downtown LA, and I can't remember the name of it now, but if you put in Google clinical trials in your area, these are bona fide research centers. They do everything by the book. And I think at one time he was doing 20 different studies in the area of type 2. He did all the studies on GLP-1s, the dual agonists, Mounjaro, and many other drugs for fatty liver. So you don't have to just go to university. There are private sites all over. So, there's a thing called Google. It's pretty good.
But I would say that the message is be empowered to reach out. Like I said, again, I can't emphasize that enough. We love when patients do that, and it's important.
Even calling your local ADA office or JDRF, calling us at TCOYD, they'll give me the message. I can help find a site for you.
Yeah, Eric will put up Steve's cell phone.
Yeah, well,
if you just put that up there.
617.
Will there ever be a trial where having a lower A1C is okay? So this is a good question because it gets at a lot of different things. So classically for studies in diabetes that are looking at improving blood sugars, you want to start with people that are not quite at goal. So their A1C generally has to be higher than 7 so that you can show some improvement. However, in the diabetes world, it's not all about blood sugar. So we're doing lots of studies with people with lower A1Cs in the 6s or whatever it might be on weight loss, on heart protection, on kidney protection, on preventing hypoglycemia. So it just depends on the nature of the study. But usually, if you came in and you said your A1C is 6 and I want to take this drug to make my A1C lower, the drug, it's going to be difficult to show that that's working versus someone that starts at 8.
What about the other end of the spectrum, Jeremy? Because a lot of these studies will say your A1C has to be between 7.5 and 10.
Yeah.
Like, what's wrong with the higher levels?
Yeah, so we get concerned, especially in type 1s, that let's say their A1C is 11, that there's some other things you need to focus on first, potentially, before enrolling in a clinical trial. Now, a clinical trial might be the thing to snap that person into gear, but you want to make sure they're taking their insulin regularly, they're not at high risk for DKA, those kinds of things. So we're not trying to be mean. We just want to make sure we're selecting people that are kind of in a safe-ish range, and then we can, get them in the trial.
Yeah, I don't like that personally. Even in the type 2 studies also have the same limit.
Yeah.
They make the assumption that if your A1C is above 10%, you're non-compliant and you're not taking your meds. That's what their fear is. But I would just say, personally, they should raise it and then ask the patient why your A1C is higher than it should be. And there's a lot of good reasons, but nonetheless, these age ranges are in most studies.
Yeah. Well, there was this thing, trials for people over 70. Yes, there are some. Unfortunately, it's not as many as I think it should be, but again, there's efforts to kind of extend that.
Well, there's that one study with Geritol in people over 70 with type 2 diabetes. Kidding.
Have either of you ever been a participant in a trial? So, no, I haven't. But there's been a number of trials that I've done that I wish I could be in, but it's a conflict. I can't be enrolled in my own study. But I haven't personally done it. Have you ever been in a study?
Yeah, you know what? I tried to enroll in a study with Earl Hirsch in Seattle, using a medication to reduce the progression of diabetic kidney disease, and it required too many visits up to Seattle.
Yeah.
But I did have my blood work done, and I was qualified, but I was just too busy, and it turned out that after the end of that study, they showed that there was no benefit. So there was no harm, but there was no benefits for the folks that did volunteer for that study. They helped advance the science of medicine, taking away all doubt that this drug may help the kidney. Because you don't just do a study without some preliminary data. But you need to do the study to make sure you nail it in the coffin and absolutely prove it.
Well, Earl told me you didn't do that study because you actually were too old.
Bring it on, bring it on. I knew that was coming.
Trials in Canada, UK, outside the US, honestly, I don't know. I think some of these mechanisms are similar. Your provider, local kind of university, these kinds of things, ADA, JDRF website, all those kinds of things. But I don't have any specific tips
I would say
outside the country.
Super similar.
Yeah.
They have big research centers, University of Toronto, other areas, because what we call a multi-center study is just more than one site, but then there's a multinational study. Many of those studies are quite common.
Yeah.
So,
any exciting trials you're currently involved with? Yeah. So, I do almost exclusively type 1 research, but definitely do some type 2 as well. Speaking of one of the few type 2 studies I'm doing is actually testing marijuana in type 2 diabetes, which is just a really kind of cool study.
that's a great, we'll give them a little details on that.
Proactively randomizing people to smoke marijuana cigarettes for 2 weeks or a placebo, and looking at things like insulin sensitivity, cardiovascular health, et cetera. Because we just don't, it's very, very difficult to study marijuana. It's still, according to the US government, like the most dangerous substance in the world. So to get it approved, I had to get, all kinds of licenses and things like that, which is crazy because here in California, we can walk literally down the street and buy as much as we want.
Where do you go?
Just, I see you there all the time. So the study is about to start, and the idea here is that we know that people that smoke marijuana, you get the munchies, they tend to eat more, but people that are users of marijuana tend to be thinner, they tend to have less diabetes. So we really want to study, okay, what actually happens when people start using this in terms of these other kind of metabolic parameters. So that's kind of a fun one.
It's fun, but to me it's important because marijuana is now becoming more available and legal in most states. Why not understand the pros and cons of it?
Yeah.
Now, how many people are you taking for the study, and is there a placebo cigarette?
Yeah, so it's only like 40 people with type 2 diabetes, so it's a kind of a small study looking at all these mechanisms, and there is a placebo, which is really kind of cool. So there's a national organization called NIDA, National Institute of Drug Abuse, actually, that actually grows marijuana for researchers, and they ultimately shipped it to me for free. But they also make a marijuana where they just extract the THC, which is the psychoactive component of it, but all the other components of the flower are still there, CBD and these other cannabidiols that people talk about. So it truly is a placebo in the sense that just the THC is removed, but this placebo still smells like marijuana, still, people don't get high, but it looks and feels otherwise like a marijuana cigarette.
And how long have you been working on this process? And you haven't even started to enroll yet.
3 years, literally, yeah.
Yeah, so...
But we just got our marijuana last week. It's sitting in the pharmacy now, so I'm very excited to do a field trip to the pharmacy.
And you have
They pre-rolled these cigarettes and sent them to us, so it's pretty exciting.
Can't use your own zigzag.
Yeah.
So if you live in San Diego and you're a type 2, you could look this up. Now, are you full yet?
We haven't started enrolling yet. But so anyways, that's exciting. All kinds of type 1 stuff going on. We're doing new kind of device studies. I mentioned on things to try to prevent hypoglycemia, other medications beyond insulin. That's kind of the main thrust of the research I do, using other medicines like we use in type 2s, GLP-1s, SC2s, to help with blood sugar, to help lose weight, to help with heart disease. And then there is some exciting stuff going on kind of the cure front in terms of cellular replacement of beta cells, et cetera. So we can do a whole other thing about that. So the point there is there's a lot going on in both type 1 and type 2, and you don't have to come to San Diego and find me. This is going on,
Yeah.
in many different places.
Other research centers where the researcher has an interest in type 2, they have probably mostly type 2 studies. So you just got to look around.
Yeah. So I think we should kind of wrap it up there.
Okay.
I've enjoyed this, and just please make sure register for our May the 4th conference, and we did a podcast on this exact topic, and I don't know if that hasn't been. Oh, it is released. It's out now.
Yes.
So we did it with Steve and I, and then kind of my right-hand man named Todd, who's my clinical trial manager, lab manager. So he had even a different perspective on this topic. So we kind of did a deeper dive in it on our podcast.
Yeah, now we also take clips of today, we put it on Instagram, and you're supposed to hit the heart, hit the like, hit the register, if I got that right.
Yeah.
Now I'm showing my age. And we want you to be followers.
Yeah.
That's it.
So we'll see you hopefully May the 4th, and if you have type 1 or a loved one with type 1, hopefully we'll literally see you here in August 16th to 18th. So
I'll buy you a drink if you come up.
he will. He means that. So take care, everybody.
All right, bye.